Most Black people no longer have a mental reference of what Black liberating information actually is. This is proven by the fact that millions now wrongly believes that a Bible written by our most ungodliest enemies and that was brutally beaten into the blood-soaked minds of our enslaved ancestors during our lowest point in history will now liberate us. This is an asinine belief, but it's believed by millions of Black people that strongly defends it. The fact that millions of Black people now walks around daily with computers in their pockets, which gives us unlimited access to unlimited verifiable information, yet insist on believing that our enslaved false Bible will liberate us, is proof that millions of Black people don't have a mental reference of what true Black liberating information actually is. The fact that millions of Black people also now believe that our minds have been manipulated and is being continuously controlled by a silly slave syndrome myth also demonstrates that millions of Black people no longer have a mental reference of what true Black liberating information actually is. That silly slave syndrome myth presents what would in fact be the least effective method used for controlling millions of generations of people. It's simply not how true brainwashing is actually achieved. True brainwashing requires a system that's being constantly reapplied and reinforced upon the collective minds of the targeted population in order to stay effective. If not, its effectiveness would lessen with each new generation instead of becoming stronger, as we witnessed amongst many of our people. Usually people have the right to believe whatever they choose to believe. However, that's a luxury that the oppressed does not have. The oppressed must function based on what is actually true in order to liberate ourselves. Because if our beliefs and understandings regarding our plight and condition are flawed, then all of our liberating remedies and strategies that stems from those flawed beliefs and misunderstandings will also be flawed. This is precisely why white oppressive forces have manipulated millions of Black people to believe that our plight is connected to a biblical fairy tale and that our condition is connected to a silly slave syndrome myth. There, in fact, are both falsehoods that are deliberately designed to keep our liberating strategies and remedies flawed. They prevent us from gaining the true and accurate understanding of our plight and condition that are necessary in order for developing the proper counter strategies that are required in order to truly liberate ourselves. To restate this more simply, the Bible and the Willie Lynch letter prevents us from learning the truth that ultimately leads to us freeing ourselves from white mental slavery. Until we learn the truth of our plight and condition, we will continue to function as wardens of our own mental prisons. This is why those of us who knows the truth must teach. African proverb. Our plight has nothing to do with a Bible written by the most ungodliest group of people we've ever encountered. In fact, our most ungodliest enemies. And our collective condition has nothing to do with a silly slave syndrome myth. Here is the truth of our plight and condition. Unlike at the conclusion of the Jewish Holocaust, when the U.S. government and the United Nations contributed massive financial support to rebuild their lives and to restore their culture, there was no moral obligation to do the same for we Africans. Although the African Holocaust lasted hundreds of years longer than the less than 12-year Jewish Holocaust and more greatly decimated the African culture and resulted in millions of more deaths, when slavery was abolished, the U.S., the U.K., and the many other white nations that brutally exploited Africa felt no moral obligations to restore the lives and culture of Africans. Those Western nations did the opposite to we Africans. They instead focused on their own self-interest. To protect the white society from eventual massive unified black retribution, they socialized Africans. Socialize is when the oppressors exploit their monopoly over information that are systematically and repetitively fed into the collective minds of the oppressed population to manipulate the oppressed to think and behave in ways that are beneficial to their oppressors. There are 4 ways to effectively socialize generations of millions of people: by what they're taught, by what they see, by what they hear, and through constant repetition. Because the white society controls the education we're taught, they controls the media images we see, and controls the societal narratives that we hear. Through repetition, they've exploited these combined factors to socialize the minds of millions of black people without most of us even realizing it. The socializing of the oppressed is deemed necessary because while the invaders, through their weaponry advantages of guns, rifles, and cannons, can invade, pillage, murder, and can oppress a group of people, they, however, cannot win their loyalty or sustain peace with them indefinitely unless their minds have been socialized to prevent dissent from rising amongst them. You see, the oppressed always eventually rebels and engage in acts of massive unified retribution against their oppressors. It's the inherent response within the collective human psyche whenever people are oppressed for long durations. The white society prevents this inherent response from happening amongst the black population by socializing us. To our own detriment, this is the hidden reality of what the white society has done to black people. It's no strange coincidence that so many black people now perceives ourselves as being our own worst enemies and now reveres and defends Caucasians in spite of a brutally horrific history of the contrary. This noted mindset amongst the black population that clearly benefits the white society is far too widespread to be coincidental. It's in fact a global occurrence, and it's by deliberate design. Black people have been stripped of our true history, knowledge of self, culture, and identity, and have instead been deliberately socialized through the white society's monopoly over information that we receive to think and behave in ways that are against our own self-interest and that instead serves the interests of the white society. It's also why most black people no longer yearns for black liberation. Most instead only wants a comfortable position within the system of white supremacy. It's also why millions now self-identify by the N-word. They socialize as to self-identify by the N-word because words have power over the subconscious mind. When repeated often enough, words affect our subconscious minds. Repeatedly calling ourselves by the N-word psychologically conditions us to perceive ourselves through a false, inherent, inferior identity that aids the white society in maintaining its white social dominance and white social capital over our lives. This is all possible because regardless of how intelligent people are, if it's possible to control the information that they receive, it's entirely possible to control what they'll believe. The white society exploits its monopoly over the information that black people receive to secretly socialize us to think and behave in ways that serves and protects their interests. White social scientists describe the nefarious manipulating practice as merely instilling a value system into the collective subconscious minds of black people that makes us adhere to the authority and existing infrastructure of the white dominant society. Because the brainwashing process has been ongoing for so long, millions of us have normalized our socialized mindset. People that have been socialized rarely, if ever, learn of this fact. This is why most black people don't know that they've been socialized. This disclosure might be new to many. However, the socializing of the oppressed is actually a very common secret practice. Throughout history, those empires that were brutally oppressive, fearing eventual retribution from those they brutally oppressed, have always socialized the minds of the oppressed to think in ways that prevents them from seeking retribution against their oppressors. Therefore, the beliefs and perceptions held by the oppressed are never truly their own. They are always falsehoods beneficial to the oppressors that were shrewdly embedded into their minds of the oppressed without the oppressed even realizing it. This nefarious practice of socializing the oppressed was never abandoned. It's what has been done and is continues to being done to Black people through the white society's monopoly over information that we receive, which accordingly allowed them to control what we believe. Our collective condition has nothing to do with a biblical fairy tale, nor a silly slave syndrome myth, nor is it the Stockholm syndrome. The truth is that Black people have been socialized by the white society. The reason why they socialize us is because it's how the white society protects its own interests, protects itself from massive unified Black retribution, how it protects its position of white dominance. You see, the white society's exploitation of Africans has provided with an era of which it has flourished most throughout history. To allow this era to end would be directly against the interests of the white society, especially given that the white society's dependence on the great minds of Black people that are hiddenly responsible for most inventions that have revolutionized the world, and that its dependence on Africa's natural resources are forever. Therefore, the socializing of the minds of the Black population is deemed necessary for the position of the white society. The socializing of Black people allows the white society to continue exploiting us without any Black resistance. Welcome to the real world. And don't be fooled. If the oppressors were truly superior, they wouldn't have to distort so many facts and tell so many blatant lies to convey it. Nor would they have to work so hard and unrelentingly behind the scenes to mentally handicap those whom they claim are inferior. It is time to wake up to our reality. The time of believing in dumb shit is over. The awakening is upon us.